Alright, now the 12 mark question is more or less the same thing, just that it's a very high weightage now. More or less, they will give you a statement that looks something like this. So they'll give you a given factor, the main reason for the outbreak of World War II. Now, the outcome they're looking for now is outbreak of World War II in Asia. Then they'll give you one main factor, in this case is Japan's economic crisis. Then they'll say how far do you agree with the statement. Alright, so you must give me a yes and a no. Alright, so best is to do the main factor first. Then after that, provide at least alternative factor for a total of 3 paragraphs. Ideal situation, 3 paragraphs would be the best. Alright, so what are you going to write about first? Write the yes first. So in this case, it is Japan's economic crisis. Bear in mind, when you must do a PEEL. Alright, but when you explain, when you're making the explanation, again, you must link it to the outbreak of World War II in Asia, which was triggered by the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because it was the bombing of Pearl Harbor that led to the declaration of war by the USA, right? So all your economic crisis points have to explain and link to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because that is a trigger factor that led to the outbreak of World War II in Asia. So for example, let's look at my yes, okay? I will put overpopulation. Economic crisis was due to my different details are overpopulation, ineffective farming methods, and the Great Depression. Then you elaborate a bit more about each point. Where do you find the details here? Again, you can find it inside my rap note. Okay, all the details are there. But the details are not enough, because the details have not helped to explain the link to the outbreak of war. So that's when your own thinking comes in, your own brainstorming. How do all these things, the economic crisis, lead to eventual outbreak of World War II? Cause and effect. Remember, it's all about cause and effect. How did all these things lead to the outbreak of war? You cannot just say, thus, due to economic crisis, it led to war. That's not enough. Okay, you must say, thus, due to all these problems that Japan is facing due to the economic crisis, they desire for expansion in order to get the resources and land that they need to solve the problem. Okay, and the more they expand, the more they felt encouraged, the more they felt emboldened to expand further. And with this expansion, what did it lead to? It led to the alert by the USA to start moving towards the need to quarantine Japan. And how did they quarantine Japan? They had an embargo. Okay, because this is not the factor I'm talking about, so you can briefly just run it through. Again, because of the economic crisis, all the problems they had, they desired to expand in order to get more resources and land. And due to this, it led to the American change in policy of embargo towards Japanese oil. And thus, in order to find more oil, they had to go to Southeast Asia to look for this resource. And in doing so, they have to first bomb Pearl Harbor to prevent American resistance. But it is this bombing that eventually led to declaration of war by the USA. So you see, you cannot just end with the problems that Japan faced. You must continue with, thus, because of all these problems, what is the action they took that led to war? Because of all these problems, they desired for expansion to get this thing, which is resources and land. And thus, this led to America changing their foreign policy to place an embargo on Japan, which led to them needing to find more resources, which then led to them moving to Southeast Asia and deciding to bomb Pearl Harbor to prevent American resistance, which then led to the declaration of war by the USA. Alright, then I consider you as you have successfully explained your paragraph. Okay, bear in mind, if you do not do this explanation, alright, you will not get higher than 2 marks. It's a very sad case. If you do not explain anything about the lead up to the outbreak of war in Asia, because this is what the question is asking for, you will get a very pathetic 2 marks. So give me the clear link to how all these things led to eventual outbreak of war. Depending on whichever outcome they want you to link to, make sure the extension is there. Again, this is similar to doing a source-based case study. It's just that now all the information should come from your brain, but the explanation still needs to be clear. all right, on how it is extended and links to the outbreak of war in Asia. Then, when you're done with this first paragraph, you can move on to alternative factors that link back to the main outcome again, outbreak of World War II. So you can talk about racial segregation. You can talk about weakness of League of Nations. You can talk about American foreign policy changes. All these things which eventually led to outbreak of war. So do the same thing. Tell me about the details about these three, either two out of three of these 3 points, right? Because 3 paragraphs is the optimum. Give me the details and then link it clearly to how this led to outbreak of war. Okay. Now, if it's one more thing to say, when you look at this thing, it's very straightforward, right? The factor they give you, Japan's economic crisis. But in some instances, the factor will not be so clear. It will not follow your textbook exactly. For example, they can give you things like the main reason for outbreak of war is due to embargo, right? If let's say the main reason is due to the embargo by the USA, okay, then there is not a point that you are familiar with, but it's a subset of what you already know. So you can explain why did Japan embargo, right? Then you can talk about the Manchurian crisis. Okay, another way they can ask you is Pearl Harbor. Okay, this is a previous question that came out previously in the previous year O level. They ask you Pearl Harbor led to outbreak of war. Okay, then you're thinking, how do I do this? Because Pearl Harbor is not one of the factors that I learned, but it is the trigger factor. Okay, it's the trigger factor that led to outbreak of war in Asia. So I will go backwards in this case. Okay, I will say the reason that Japan initiated Pearl Harbor. So in my details, I will talk about the American foreign policy changes, because that is the thing that led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So I would say Pearl Harbor led to the outbreak of World War II in Asia. Pearl Harbor was initiated due to the trade embargo placed by the USA. And then I'll give me the reason why they placed this trade embargo and what did Japan do after that. Okay, so that's how you answer the question. If let's say they don't give you a factor that you're familiar with, but most of the time they will give you a factor like this, which is following the textbook main factors. Okay, then you just explain accordingly. So you must be very familiar with your knowledge in order to answer the different types of questions that can come out.